You were never meant to remember this. That's why they made it boring. That's how they hide it. Not with fire, not with war, but with silence, with yawns, with textbooks so dry they could choke the wind out of your lungs. They knew you'd never look twice at the dates, the dust, the kingdoms of men that rose and fell like forgotten breath. That was the plan. Dull it down, drain it, sand the edges until nothing cuts, nothing bleeds, and nothing wakes you up. But history, real history, is soaked in secrets. Rituals carved into stone with trembling hands. Cities swallowed whole for asking the wrong questions. Families erased from time because their blood carried something ancient and forbidden. But you won't hear this from your professor. You won't read it on Wikipedia. Because the truth was wrapped in chains, dropped in the deepest trench, and stamped too boring to matter. That's where we begin. Tonight, I'm not going to shout at you. I'm going to whisper. Because the loudest truths are the ones you must lean in to hear. And once you do, you won't ever unhear them. Behind every forgotten war is a currency no one speaks of. Behind every dead empire is a name that was never supposed to be spoken. And behind every boring chapter in your school book is a door. And here's the first one. In 1832, a small college in Vermont banned a book. Not because it was obscene, not because it was violent, but because its footnotes suggested something radical. That a civilization existed in North America thousands of years before the tribes they taught you about. A stone temple under Lake Champlain. Statues with eyes too ancient to be native. The professor who proposed this vanished. They called it academic misplacement. But the janitor who cleaned his office found an old map burned into the back of a chair. A shape of the continent no cartographer had ever drawn. They called it dull. But dullness is the first veil of control. You're not here to be entertained. You're here to wake up, and this is just the beginning. They say Byzantium fell in 1453. They say the Ottomans stormed the gates, and the last Roman Empire collapsed into smoke and sorrow. But they, those careful writers of your history books, left something out, not an error, a decision, because something else happened in the shadows of that burning city. Something no official record dared include. As Constantinople burned, a fleet disappeared 37 ships, loaded not with soldiers, but with scrolls, maps, relics, and gold, stamped with a symbol, not Roman, but something older. Something borrowed from a culture that supposedly never touched European soil. The symbol, a double-headed eagle, clutching a serpent in its talons. Not from Rome, not from Greece, but from the ruins beneath Lake Baikal, Siberia. Those ships never made it to any known port, at least, not publicly. But for the next 2 centuries, random towns in northern Africa, coastal India, even the Azores, reported the same thing. White-bearded strangers, speaking a language no one could place, trading in silver coins, etched with constellations that hadn't aligned for 4,000 years. Historians call it legend, a fable, the ravings of spice traders and desert monks. But let me ask you this. Why did 3 separate governments, France, England, and Portugal, send exploratory fleets to the exact same region of the South Atlantic within 2 months of each other in 1611? What were they racing for? And why is that year, minus 1611, the same year King James published his version of the Bible, with 66 books? Too many things line up when you start pulling the string. And here's what you'll notice. Every time truth threatens to surface, something official shows up to cover it. A war, a reform, a new religion, a royal wedding. They hand you a stage play. While the real kingdom, the one that never died, slips into the mist with a new name, a new mask, and a new agenda. You think you know history. You were taught to sleep through it. But if that ancient kingdom never truly died, what if it still rules from behind the curtain? You were never meant to ask that. And now that you have, the descent begins. They always blame the conqueror in every retelling of the destruction of the Library of Alexandria. They point the finger outward. The Romans, the Muslims, the Christians. The fire that danced for days, licking scrolls that had survived a dozen civilizations. Everyone has a version. Everyone has a scapegoat. But what if I told you the library didn't burn from invasion, but from intention? Not external destruction. Internal betrayal. See, the final years of the library were not ones of peace. Deep within its marble halls, factions had formed, scholars arguing over what was too dangerous to preserve, knowledge that bent the mind too far, maps to the hollow places of earth, the 7 codes of the pre-dynastic pharaohs, the doctrine of the silent tongue, a manuscript that described language as a weapon, not of sound, but of vibration. Tone-based commands to shut down the mind's questioning instinct. Buried under the guise of ritual hymns, recited in churches today, sound crazy. Then ask yourself why most modern alphabets come from a single source, Phoenician, and why that same root is where we get the word phonetics. Language isn't just communication, it's control. They knew it. And some of them tried to stop it. The real fire at Alexandria wasn't lit by an army. It was sparked in a quiet room where 6 men voted to erase a future they feared and feared. Others would seek, and here's the part they won't tell you. Some scrolls survived, and not just 1 or 2. Because before the vote, a renegade scribe, named Ammonius, took 24 crates across the desert, not to preserve them for humanity, but to hide them from it. He believed the knowledge had to sleep, had to wait for an age that could wield it without falling into madness. He buried them beneath a temple that doesn't exist anymore. At least, not on any map. But there are stories. A place in the Libyan desert where compasses spin, and birds refuse to fly overhead. We're not talking about fairy tales. We're talking about forbidden blueprints to how your mind works, and how it's been worked against you. Sleep through history, and they wake up, and everything breaks open. You've heard of Napoleon, the emperor, the exile, the ego, but you haven't heard about what they did to him on the island. After his defeat at Waterloo, they told you he was banished to a desolate rock in the middle of the Atlantic. St. Helena, a place so remote, escape was impossible. Surrounded by nothing but ocean and British guards. But think about it. Why send a man there? Why keep a defeated leader under such extreme isolation, guarded like a live nuke? Because he wasn't just a prisoner. He was a test subject. In 1820, a ship docked at St. Helena, under the British flag. It carried no cargo, just 5 men. Names, no uniforms. Their papers were marked with a single word, somnum, Latin for sleep. For the next 2 years, Napoleon began to change. Not physically, mentally. His letters became erratic. He began repeating phrases that made no sense. The door is within, they count our hours. Waking is treason. And then, in one letter smuggled to a loyalist in Paris, he wrote something chilling. They've shown me the histories that weren't written. They've played me voices in dreams. I'm no longer Napoleon, I'm what he was built on. They say he died of stomach cancer, but his autopsy was rushed, and the lead doctor, Francesco Antomarchi, vanished from all records 3 weeks later. No grave, no family, gone. But here's the fracture point. After Napoleon's death, something odd happened. In 1821, the British Empire abruptly invested in a strange new technology, mass printing of educational texts. Within a decade, schools across Europe were flooded with sanitized versions of history. Empires became moral actors. Conquerors became men of honor. The chaos of real history was filed down like a coffin nail, and all of it was based on Napoleon's rewritten thoughts, not the man, but the puppet they made of him during those final years on St. Helena. The island wasn't his prison, it was his programming center. He slept, and woke up a tool. And if they could do that to a man like him, what do you think they've done to you, through your schools, your entertainment, your dreams? The experiments never stopped. They just scaled up. And your history class, it was part of it. You think you know what year it is. They told you it's 2025. But based on what? Time, as you understand it, is not neutral. It's not a measurement. It's a weapon. And in 1582, they sharpened that weapon. That year, Pope Gregory XIII introduced a calendar, the one you still use today. The Gregorian calendar, a correction, they called it. A better way to track the solar year. Cleaner, simpler. They erased 10 days from time, just like that. October 4th was followed by October 15th. 10 days gone, like memory wiped clean. And no one asked, what was so dangerous in those 10 days? They had to be cut from time itself. But here's the darker truth. The Gregorian calendar wasn't designed to track time. It was designed to control perception, because before it, people followed natural time. Lunar cycles, planting moons, star alignments. They woke and slept with. The earth time was fluid, alive, anchored in the body, not the clock. But when the calendar changed, time became mechanical, rigid. You weren't just told when to work. You were told when to feel, and the structure of that calendar. It's not arbitrary. 12 months, 7-day weeks, work 5, rest 2. Now cross-reference that with ancient Babylonian lunar rites, the same structure used in temple slavery, a rhythm, designed not for freedom, but for obedience. Coincidence? There's more. The new calendar inverted sacred alignments. Solstices, once points of awakening, were buried under commercial holidays. Equinoxes, once ceremonies of balance, were replaced. With tax cycles and fiscal years, you weren't just shifted in time. You were placed in a cage built from numbers, taught to forget the pulse of the earth, and replace it with ticking. And the ones who opposed this vanished. The Kuldies, in Ireland, the Time Walkers of the Cossack steppe, the Navi priests in Mali, all erased within 2 generations of the Gregorian rollout. Why? Because they remembered how time really worked, and what you could do when you broke free of its artificial grip. But the real trick, they didn't hide this calendar. They made you live by it. You're not counting time anymore. You're being counted by it. And if time is a cage, who's holding the key? Borders are lies. Flags are symbols of illusion. But there's one nation, one invisible empire, that never flew a flag, never declared a war, and yet it conquered the world. And you've never heard its name, because its name was erased. Long before the first bullet was ever fired, historians whisper about it. They call it the Silent Dominion. It began, allegedly, in the 6th century. Not in Europe, not in Asia, but beneath them. A web of families, bound not by land, but by belief, that history itself could be the greatest tool of manipulation, if rewritten slowly enough. Not all at once. Just a word here, a date there, a kingdom renamed, a prophet demonized. A war, rebranded, control the textbooks. And in 3 generations, no one remembers what actually happened, but the Silent Dominion didn't stop at education, it infiltrated identity. They pioneered something now called psychological state mirroring. Long before modern psychiatry, they mapped the nervous system's response to language. They learned that if you repeat a version of history long enough, even if it contradicts direct ancestral memory, the brain will surrender to it. That's why whole cultures began to forget their own gods. Why sacred sites were renamed ruins. Why tribal lineages, that once spanned millennia, now struggle to trace back 200 years. The Dominion rewrote their myths, and called it education. But it wasn't just the past they wanted. It was the mind, the birth of the national anthem. Dominion construct. Pledge of Allegiance. Dominion ritual. The glorification of war monuments, while burying civilian death tolls. Dominion doctrine. Because when history is boring, you stop questioning. When it's fragmented, you stop connecting. And when it's mythologized, just enough, you start worshipping your jailer. The Silent Dominion never needed armies. It needed only time, and your trust. But here's what they didn't account for. Awakening doesn't happen all at once. It happens like a crack in the dam. One moment of clarity at a time. And now, you've seen the crack. Keep watching, and it grows. And when the dam breaks, you won't just remember history. You'll remember who you were before it was rewritten. They teach you that revolution is noble, that it rises from the people, raw, honest, unstoppable. But what they never taught you is that some of the loudest revolutions in history were not born from suffering. They were planted, manufactured dissent, from the French Revolution to the Bolsheviks. From Mao's Cultural Revolution to the more modern color revolutions that sweep through nations, like wildfire. There's a pattern, and it doesn't start with a grievance. It starts with a script. You'll find it. Every time, a corrupt ruler, exaggerated in the retelling. A suffering people, always conveniently documented in advance. A sudden wave of pamphlets, radios, broadcasts, all saying the same words in the same tone. Then chaos. Then blood. Then a new order. But look behind the curtain. Who printed the pamphlets? Who funded the protests? Who armed the rebels just enough, but not too much? The French Revolution was supposed to be a popular uprising against monarchy. But do you know who funded much of the early ideological spread? A banking network operating out of Amsterdam, whose records were mysteriously lost during World War II. The Bolsheviks were radical Marxists, right? And yet, weeks before the October Revolution, Lenin was transported in a sealed train across enemy territory, with gold provided by men who despised communism. Why? Because if you control the revolution, you control the rebirth. The chaos isn't the point. It's the cover, a reset button, not for liberation, but for new systems of control. Think of it like a software update. Your old monarchy is outdated. Install democracy, but patch it with central banking, mass media, and legal loopholes no one will ever read. Your feudal system is unstable. No problem. Implement communism. But seed it with internal informant networks and psychological warfare. In every case, the people think they're free. But what they've really inherited is a smarter prison, and the guards, they no longer wear red coats or black boots. They wear lab coats, suits, credentials. They sit behind screens, tracking belief systems like currency. So ask yourself, when they tell you to rise up, are you starting the fire? Or are you just lighting the match they handed you? You were taught to believe that schools are where minds are shaped, where truth is handed down, where the past is preserved and the future protected. But what if I told you? School was never designed to educate you. It was designed to standardize you. Let's go back. Prussia. 18th century. A kingdom obsessed with control. After a brutal series of uprisings, Prussian elites realized something. Force creates resistance, but structure silent. Invisible structure creates obedience. So they invented the modern classroom. Rose bells, subjects divided like factory parts, uniform tests, rigid schedules. It wasn't modeled after ancient forums or philosophical academies, it was modeled after military barracks. The Prussian system was exported first to the UK, then to the US. Horace Mann brought it to Massachusetts in 1837, praising it as the future of civilization. But buried in his notes was a chilling phrase: we must break the independent will in favor of social unity. They didn't want thinkers, they wanted repeaters. And it worked. Schools became factories, not of knowledge, but of compliance. Children taught not how to think, but what to think. And more importantly, what not to question. Have you ever wondered why the most dangerous, revolutionary ideas in history, the ones that actually changed the world, are never taught in school? You learned about the American Revolution, but not about the fact that Ben Franklin was part of secret societies that traced back to Egyptian mystery schools. You learned about the Industrial Revolution, but not that many of its pioneers were deeply involved in occult experimentation and child labor rituals disguised as morality tests. They taught you names, dates, flags, but they never taught you the mechanism, the why, because if you knew that, you'd stop playing the game. And here's the paradox. The smarter you were in school, the more obedient you became. You followed the rules. You passed the tests. You colored within the lines. And they rewarded you with a degree, a job, a life. But not freedom, never freedom. Because that was never the goal. Now, I want you to comment this phrase twice, to seal this realization in your mind: I do not consent to the script. Write it, claim it. Let the algorithm echo it. Not just to boost this video, but to signal to others that they're not alone in seeing it. Now lean in, because in the next section, you'll learn why even your thoughts were never fully yours. You wake up every day thinking your thoughts are your own. They're not. They haven't been for a long time. Because what you call thinking is often just a preloaded script echoing in your head. A carefully curated pattern injected through language, media, and repetition. Let me explain. In 1951, a little-known psychological experiment was run under the codename Project Mirror. It was hidden inside educational reform movements and memory clinics. On the surface, it studied cognition. But beneath the surface, it was something else entirely. They discovered that by the age of 7, the average child had already internalized over 90% of their lifelong thought patterns, not through logic, but through emotional imprinting, tone, image, rhythm, shame. That's how beliefs are installed. Now, ask yourself, what were you taught to fear at 7? Shame for asking questions. Embarrassment for being curious. Rewards for memorization, but silence for doubt. That's not education, that's conditioning, and it's not random. In 1974, a classified memo circulated through 5 major Western intelligence agencies. The subject line: controlling cognitive infrastructure in democratic populations. The goal: not to lie to you directly, but to control the limits of what you're willing to think. It works like this. First, you narrow the language. Then, you stigmatize dissent. Then, you drown everything in entertainment. Finally, you make truth boring. And once that happens, the enemy doesn't need to censor you. You censor yourself. You'll laugh off ancient maps showing Antarctica without ice. You'll dismiss architectural alignments between Giza and Angkor Wat as coincidence. You'll scoff at the idea that your emotions are being tracked and mapped in real time to predict your decisions before you even make them. And you'll call it critical thinking, but it's not. It's the result of years of carefully sculpted psychological gravity, pulling your awareness away from the real questions and back into the box they built for you. You weren't born in that box. You were placed there, and now you're scratching the walls. But don't stop. Scratch deeper. Because what comes next is the sound of the lock turning. You walk through cities every day: steel towers, concrete squares, roundabouts, government buildings, schools. You think it's just design, just urban planning. But what if I told you cities are coded, not for beauty, not for efficiency, but for control? Let's rewind. In the 1600s, a movement quietly emerged in Europe, not in the cathedrals, not in the royal courts, but in guilds. Secret lodges, ancient brotherhoods, whose symbols now decorate your dollar bills and your courtrooms. These weren't masons laying brick. They were geomancers, architects, who understood that space affects thought, the angles of a building, the orientation of a hallway, the placement of light and shadow. All of it feeds your nervous system instructions. They called it harmonic suppression. The idea was simple: build environments that mute inner clarity and amplify submission, and that's exactly what they did. Your schools: rows of fluorescent lights, square tiles, rectangular clocks. Every hallway is a box. Every classroom faces one direction. Your offices: cubicles, cubes, angles, repetition, surveillance lines, even public parks. Those places meant for freedom are sectioned into grids with paths curving just enough to redirect attention, but never enough to awaken it. It's not accidental. The layout of Washington, D.C., look at it from above. It's not random. It's not just patriotic. It's ritual architecture. Obelisks, temples, crossroads, mapped to soul. The Capitol dome is a replica of St. Peter's Basilica, which is a replica of the Roman Pantheon, which was aligned to solar sacrifice cycles long before Christianity ever existed. And yet, you walk these cities every day, feeling normal, not realizing your mind is adjusting to the architecture, that your emotions shift depending on your placement in a system designed to keep your spirit low and your focus horizontal. Look around you right now. Square walls, edged corners, screens. You were built into this. And the true power of architecture isn't what it shows. It's what it prevents you from seeing. There are structures designed to raise consciousness. You'll find them in forgotten temples, stone circles, domes carved with golden ratios. But they were buried, destroyed, or turned into tourist spots. Because those didn't cage the mind, they freed it, and that was never allowed. You think sound is just vibration and air. But ancient cultures knew better. They didn't just hear sound, they used it to heal, to build, to destroy. Now ask yourself, why did every major ancient civilization, Egypt, India, China, Sumer, obsess over sound-based rituals, because frequency is a tool, a weapon, a gateway, and someone decided you weren't allowed to remember that. Let me take you back to 1939. That year, something subtle but world-changing happened. An international agreement was made, led by British and American agencies, to standardize musical pitch, A equals 440. G. They told the public it was for consistency in musical instruments. But behind closed doors, it was backed by military and psychological operations. Because prior to that, music was tuned to 432 Hz, a frequency aligned with the natural resonance of the earth, of human DNA, of heart rhythms and brainwaves. At 432 Hz, music calms, centers, elevates consciousness. At 440 Hz, the frequencies subtly agitate, fracture, internal alignment, induce anxiety in ways most can't articulate. Still think it's just music. Then why did Nazi scientists, during World War II, experiment with acoustic frequency as a method of mass behavioral control? Why did the CIA, under MK Ultra, study induction through repetitive sound? Why did ancient Vedic texts describe sacred chants that could split stone? And why are those specific chants now outlawed in public temples? Because frequency alters state. And if you control the frequency, you control the state of the population. From the hum of your refrigerator, to the buzz of your fluorescent lights, to the background music in every mall, you are bathed in artificial tones designed to keep you slightly dissonant, never calm enough to think deeply, never aligned enough to remember who you are. Even Gregorian chants, the religious ones, were once tuned to solfeggio frequencies, 396, 528, 963 Hz, tones that, according to ancient orders, could awaken dormant potential in the human soul. But those frequencies were removed, declared non-sector, buried. So, ask yourself, why is truth boring and noise everywhere? Because your nervous system has been hijacked, and history didn't just rewrite the past, it rewired you. Empires no longer wear crowns. They wear smiles. They hold press conferences, not parades. They don't conquer you with armies anymore. They conquer you with relief. Because modern control doesn't look like domination. It looks like a helping hand. Let's go back to 1944. The war was ending. Cities were rubble, borders broken, faith in nations shattered. And then came the saviors, not kings, not generals, but institutions. The IMF, the World Bank, UNESCO, who built, we were told, to prevent another global disaster, to feed the hungry, to rebuild what war had taken. But behind the glossy brochures and blue flags was something colder, something calculated. These organizations were seeded, not to lift the world, but to standardize it. Loans came with terms. Relief came with rewrites. You want funding? Change your education system. You want vaccines? Adopt our policies. You want food? Sign this agreement. Oh, and hand over your mineral rights. And the most brilliant part, they never had to fire a single shot, because charity became the new colonization. From Africa to Southeast Asia, from South America to Eastern Europe, the same script repeated: a crisis, a savior, a debt, a contract, a loss of sovereignty. By 1971, more than 80 countries had signed development agreements that quietly handed over legal control of water, land, or industry to foreign entities, for the promise of modernity. And who wrote the fine print? Law firms linked to the same banking, families that funded both sides of World War II, the same families who funded the creation of national banks, then privatized them, the same families whose names no longer appear in headlines, but still appear on legal charters and oil fields. It wasn't about money. It was about control without resistance. Because what person resists help? What nation questions a gift? But here's the rub. When your food depends on someone else's supply line, you're not free. When your medicine comes from labs you'll never visit, you're not sovereign. And when your history is rewritten by the institutions that claim to protect you, you're not educated. You're owned, with a velvet collar and a barcode soul. You think ritual is a thing of the past. You think ancient ceremonies died with the priests, the temples, and the old gods. But here's what no historian dares say. The rituals never ended. They were rebranded, stripped of symbols, wrapped in science, repackaged as culture. And you take part in them every single day. Let me show you. Why do global leaders meet at set intervals? Behind closed doors, under full moons, with precise seating arrangements and colors coded by rank. Why do entertainment awards, the ones you worship, feature checkerboard floors, golden idols, and flame-crowned stages? Why do sporting events begin with synchronized chants, sacrifices of attention, the raising of banners, and moments of silence? You've been told these are traditions. But traditions are just rituals that forgot their purpose. And rituals are just programs. Programs written in the subconscious of civilization, carried out not for celebration, but for anchoring control. Let's go deeper. The Temple of Baal, a site of ancient sacrificial rites, was rebuilt in New York and London in 2016, not to honor history, but as an educational installation. Thousands passed under its archways unaware that in ancient Babylon, that arch was called the Gate of Submission. They walked through willingly, because they thought it was art. This is how modern power operates, not by hiding, but by disguising. They didn't end ritual. They automated it. You celebrate New Year's Eve, not knowing it's a resurrection rite. You graduate wearing black robes and square hats, not realizing the cap symbolizes the Saturnian cube, the ancient symbol of time-bound control. You vote, thinking it's choice, but you're casting a ballot into a box. Just like the bulla, in Roman times, a token of submission to Caesar. They've kept the form, but drained the meaning, because meaning is power, and they want that. Power for themselves. The real history of ritual isn't about gods. It's about commanding collective energy, directing focus, binding will. And if you think this is just symbolic, then ask yourself, why are the world's most powerful families still obsessed with astrology, bloodlines, and sacred geometry? Because they never stopped practicing, they just made sure you did. The lie began in silence. Not with kings, not with priests, but with historians, the ones who knew the truth and chose to bury it. You've been told that history is written by the victors. That's not wrong. But it's incomplete, because it's also rewritten by the obedient, the academic class, the professors, the scholars, the experts. Were not always pawns. Many began as seekers, investigators, men and women who stepped too close to the forbidden, and then they vanished. Or, worse, they were promoted. Let me tell you a story. In 1929, a Turkish archaeologist named Helal Edhim unearthed a strange artifact, a world map, older than cartography should allow. It showed Antarctica, ice-free, a continent supposedly undiscovered, unmapped, and covered in glaciers for thousands of years. The Piri Reis map, it was declared authentic, carbon-dated, a historical impossibility, and then dismissed. Scholars said it was a coincidence, a myth, an error. But that wasn't the only case. In China, hundreds of scrolls recovered from the Dunhuang caves described flying machines, sky vessels, and men descending from stars during the Shang dynasty. They were locked in academic archives, sealed, labeled as cultural fiction. In Mexico, archaeologist William Niven found tablets beneath the Valley of Mexico that detailed an ancient civilization older than the Olmecs, with writing never before seen. He was ridiculed, funding pulled, artifacts lost in a warehouse fire. You see, academia isn't about discovery, it's about boundaries. Historians are gatekeepers, not just of the past, but of what you're allowed to remember. Universities, once born from mystery schools, became the perfect disguise, cathedrals of reason, preaching state-approved memory. They hand you degrees, but hide the archives. They give you timelines, but redact the anomalies. Because if you knew how deep the past goes, if you truly saw the mosaic of forbidden civilizations, sacred technologies, and paradigm-breaking knowledge, you would stop listening. You would stop believing their curated script, and their world would unravel. That's why the scholars who tell too much disappear quietly, and those who stay, they learn to say just enough to sound brilliant, but never enough to be dangerous. They say time is a constant, but that's a lie dressed in a calendar. What if I told you, ... There's a missing century in history, not lost, erased. It's called the phantom time hypothesis, and it claims that 297 years of our calendar, from 614 to 911 AD, never actually happened. According to this theory, powerful men rewrote the very structure of time to legitimize their rule, and most people never questioned it. Because, who questions time? But let's go deeper. Holy Roman Emperor Otto III, with the help of Pope Sylvester II, is said to have manipulated historical records to place themselves in the millennium year. The year 1000 AD, for symbolic power. They fabricated rulers. They created events. And they inserted Charlemagne, a towering figure of European myth, not as a real king, but a propaganda ghost. You see, when too much of history is based on manuscripts, fragile, biased, inconsistent, it becomes easy to add a century or two. Monks copying texts in candlelit silence, empires burning libraries, and wars giving every excuse to revise the past in ashes. But here's what they don't want you to know. Entire periods of history are shockingly void of physical evidence. Buildings vanish. Artifacts are missing. Skylines go silent. It's as if the world paused, and no one noticed. Or worse, someone noticed and made sure you never would. Even today, we trust a Gregorian calendar created by religious elites, not because it's perfect, but because it makes us predictable. It tells you when to rise, when to rest, when to celebrate, when to mourn. But if time itself is a forgery, then what else have they faked? How many civilizations collapsed not by nature, but by being deleted? How many truths are buried not in ruins, but in the white spaces between pages? History isn't just written by the victors, it's edited by the engineers of time, and the moment you realize your own reality is dated by fiction, ... You stop being a citizen of now, and you start waking up in the void between the lines. They told you history was boring, and that was the first red flag, because no man walks away from true power unless he's been trained to. In school, you were handed a textbook, not a truth. You were taught memorization, not meaning. You were told the names of presidents, not the names of the men who controlled them. You were shown timelines steady, linear, comfortable. But the truth is that history is a twisting parasite, a virus with selective memory. And the education system, it's not there to enlighten you. It's there to flatten you. Think about it. You were taught about revolutions, but not the bankers who funded both sides. You were shown the horrors of war, but not the corporations that profited as cities burned. You memorized dates, not consequences. Heroes, not handlers. It's not that you learned too little. It's that you learned only what they allowed. Why else would an empire build schools to mold its citizens? Because they know a child who questions becomes a man who challenges. So they feed you decades of acceptable knowledge, filtered, diluted, and stripped of fire. And by the time you reach adulthood, the cage is internal. You don't just forget history, you forget how to remember it. You laugh at conspiracies. You defend the narrative. You become the guard of your own mental prison. And here's the hardest truth. Most of your thoughts weren't born from you. They were installed, drip-fed, through exams, entertainment, slogans, and silence. Every classroom became a factory. Every degree a chain, not because education is evil, but because indoctrination wears a cap and gown. And so you grew up fluent in forgetting. You forgot that governments lie. You forgot that power rewrites. You forgot that silence doesn't mean truth. It just means someone paid for the silence. And maybe that's why history felt dull to you, because they stripped it of blood, of betrayal, of raw, unfiltered power. But now you know. Now you see the seams in the structure. And if you've made it this far, you're no longer just watching this video. You're remembering something you were trained to forget. Every empire wraps itself in a flag before it wraps its people in chains. You were taught to pledge allegiance. Before you could even read, you stood in rows, hand on heart, staring at cloth stitched with stars, believing you were free, because someone told you you were. But what they never said was that flags aren't about freedom. They're about control, disguised as unity. You see, the powerful have always needed symbols, not because they believe in them, but because you do. The flag is a mask. Behind it, contracts signed in shadow, blood spilled in deserts you've never heard of, resources stolen. Governments toppled, all while you wave a piece of fabric and chant words you didn't write. But here's the twist: no one wants to face. The same flag that makes you proud also makes you obedient. It makes you fight wars you don't understand, pay taxes you never agreed to, defend borders drawn by men who never bled to protect them. And the truly powerful, the ones who don't wear uniforms, who don't run for office, they stay hidden. They let the flag do their work. Because they know, if a man dies for a cause, the world mourns him. But if he dies for a symbol, the world forgets him. That's why every fallen soldier is honored with flags, not with facts. It's not to reveal what really happened, it's to seal it away. To make sure you never ask, who profited from the conflict? Who printed the money that funded it? Who fed both sides while millions starved? And most importantly, who's next? The truth is, nationalism is a chessboard. The pieces move while the kings remain untouched. And you were born into the game. Told who to cheer for, who to hate, who to become. But now, something's shifting. You're not just seeing the flag. You're seeing what's behind it. And that's where the transformation begins. Because once you recognize that power uses symbols to blind you, you stop waving them blindly. You start asking dangerous questions. And those questions, they lead to freedom no flag can ever give you. What if I told you that every desire you've ever had was planted? Not just influenced, engineered. The shoes you thought looked cool, the job you thought would make you proud, the house you dreamed of owning, even the type of woman you think you prefer, none of it is truly yours. Because long before you wanted it, someone designed it. Not someone with a clipboard in a lab, but systems, networks, generations of manipulation. So subtle, it doesn't even feel like control. Let me show you how deep this goes. When you scroll your feed, you think you're choosing what you like. But in reality, every swipe is recorded. Every pause. Every second your eye lingers. And that data, it's fed into machines built by corporations who do not care about you, only about your patterns. Then, they show you more of what makes you click, stay, spend, until your entire life becomes a mirror, reflecting desires that were never born from within, but injected from without. But this didn't start with TikTok. Desire manufacturing is an ancient art. The pharaohs used it. The church perfected it. The industrialists monetized it. And today, it wears the smiling mask of personalization. Think about this. When was the last time you wanted something, genuinely wanted it, that didn't come from a screen? Something not advertised, not trend-driven, not sold to you by influencers, brands, or algorithms. Hard to remember, isn't it? Because your sense of desire has been hijacked. You are no longer the author of your wants. You are the reactor. And when a man doesn't know why he wants what he wants, he can be led anywhere. This is how control is maintained without chains. They don't need to lock you up. They just give you a cage you're proud to live in, and let you decorate it with your favorite colors. Blue pill or red pill. You didn't choose either. They were placed in front of you by the same hand. But now, you're starting to see the hand. And once you see it, you stop reaching blindly. You begin to reclaim your will, piece by piece. And that's when the architects get nervous, because a man with reclaimed desire is no longer predictable. He's no longer profitable. He's dangerous. What if I told you that every major rebellion you've ever studied, every grassroots movement, every supposed fight for the people, was funded, guided, or pre-approved by the very elites it claimed to overthrow? You were taught to romanticize revolution, Che Guevara posters, French guillotines, even Silicon Valley's startup disruptors. But in the corridors of true power, revolt is not feared. It is anticipated, even engineered. Let's break it down. Throughout history, when empires feel the pressure of discontent, they don't wait for the dam to burst. They build a valve, a fake release, something to let the steam out, while keeping the system intact. It looks like change, Sounds like resistance, but underneath, it's still the same machine, just wearing a different mask. Think of how many revolutions ended with a new leader, only to enforce the same controls in a different costume. Why does this happen? Because power does not fear chaos, it uses it. Power thrives when people believe they are changing things, while remaining inside the maze it built for them in 20th century Europe. Radical political parties were often covertly funded by intelligence agencies. Why? Because it's better to lead the opposition than to fight it. Control both sides, and you control the outcome. Let that sink in. Even in your lifetime, the cultural rebellions, the woke movements, the populist waves, they all have one thing in common: they eventually funnel right back into the institutions they claim to challenge. Why? Because most people don't want truth. They want comfort. They want a better cage, not freedom. So the system gives them symbols to believe in. Flags, faces, protests, hashas. It gives them something to chant. So they stop asking who's holding the leash, and if any true threat to power emerges, it is silenced, mocked, or absorbed before it can gain momentum. Now you understand why so many movements start with fire and end in paperwork. Because they were never meant to win. They were meant to keep you busy, to drain your spirit, to make you feel like you're doing something while the real strings remain untouched. But you're seeing through it, and once you see the puppet show for what it is, you stop clapping, you stop performing, you step off the stage, and when enough men do that, the theater burns down. There's something older than kings, older than flags, older than religion, an invisible design, not written on scrolls, but carved into culture, power, and memory itself. Every civilization from the pharaohs to the Pentagon follows it, and you've been living in its shadow since the day you were born. We're talking about the Dominion template, not a myth, not a conspiracy, but a repeatable blueprint, quietly passed down, generation to generation, always in different languages, worn by different costumes, but the structure, identical. Let me show you. Step 1. Create a central myth, something so emotionally resonant that it bypasses logic. It could be divine, right, democracy, security, equality. It doesn't matter what it is, only that people believe it more than they believe themselves. Step 2. Build rituals around that myth. Holidays, national anthems, school pledges, news, cycles. Everyday acts that reinforce the illusion over and over, until questioning them feels like blasphemy. Step 3. Introduce a symbolic enemy, someone to fear, someone to blame, someone to fight, so people never notice who's really in charge. Sometimes it's witches, sometimes it's heretics, sometimes it's terrorists, sometimes it's you. Step 4. Control the record of history. Rewrite it. Burn what doesn't fit. Elevate what does. Make the past feel like destiny, so no one imagines a different future. Step 5. Offer small freedoms, just enough to keep hope alive, just enough to keep people from tearing the walls down. Call it free speech, but flood the airwaves with noise. Call it democracy, but pre-select the choices. Call it freedom, but track every move, every purchase, every thought. It's all part of the template. Even now, the same forces are at play, not because of a secret society or shadow government, but because the template works, because people crave stories more than truth, because comfort is stronger than rebellion, because control, wrapped in the language of liberation, is the most powerful trap of all. And unless you see the script beneath the show, you'll keep clapping for your own cage. But you're not clapping anymore. You're starting to read the lines. You're noticing the repetition. You're hearing the echoes in every anthem, every speech, every headline. And once you recognize the pattern, you can break it. Or if you're tired enough, you can finally rest, knowing that even the dullest history has a whisper of rebellion tucked inside. Look inside yourself. What is the most powerful weapon ever wielded against mankind? It's not guns, not armies, not even governments. It's fear. Fear is the invisible cage that locks the mind tighter than any chain. From ancient times, rulers understood this, not just how to wield armies, but how to engineer fear itself. They knew if you could scare a man enough, make him afraid of strangers, of ideas, of himself. You could keep him silent, compliant. Broken dot. Look at history. Witch hunts fueled by paranoia. Inquisitions, fueled by dread. Mass hysteria, fueled by rumors. Wars, fueled by terror. Fear became a tool to fracture communities, to isolate dissenters, to justify violence. But the most brilliant trick, the fear they planted, was never about reality. It was about controlling perception. They used symbols, rumors, propaganda, rituals, designed to trigger ancient fears, buried deep in your subconscious. And here's the thing, you still carry those fears. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of speaking out, fear of waking up. It's the silent voice that whispers, stay quiet, don't rock the boat. Because the moment you step beyond fear, you step into power. You see the chains for what they are. You break the script, and you begin to reclaim your mind. But beware, fear fights. Back it will scream louder. It will mask itself as reason, caution, even wisdom, because it knows the moment it loses you, it loses control. So I ask you now, will you let fear decide your story, or will you write it yourself? Because this battle isn't outside, it's inside, and the real war is over who controls your mind. Look around. The war for your mind isn't fought with guns or tanks, it's fought in silence, in the mundane, in the endless, grinding rhythm of everyday life. The commute, the news, the endless barrage of notifications, the corporate meetings, the social media scroll. This is the battlefield, because power doesn't need to conquer you openly. It conquers you by wearing down your attention, by fragmenting your focus, by drowning you in noise until you forget how to think clearly. Every distraction is a bullet. Every trivial argument is a landmine. Every moment spent consuming instead of creating is a victory for control. And it's not an accident. Institutions design your days to be busy, but empty dot. They want you tired. Tired minds don't question. Tired hearts don't resist. Tired souls don't dream. This war is invisible because it's personal. It's waged against your curiosity, your drive, your will. They don't want you to realize you're a soldier. Because the moment you see the war, you stop marching, you stop obeying, you start fighting back. But how do you fight an enemy you can't see? By becoming aware, by reclaiming your time, your focus, your energy. This is the call to arms that nobody will announce. The quiet rebellion happening when you refuse to be distracted, when you silence the noise, when you choose to think deeply in a world built to keep you shallow. This war is exhausting, it's relentless, but the victory is not in the streets, it's in your mind, and it's yours to take. The moment you wake up, the world shifts. Suddenly, the comforting veil is torn away. Colors become harsher, voices become louder, truths become more dangerous. And you realize awakening isn't a gift. It's a burden, because once you see the machinery behind the curtain, you can never pretend it's not there. Friends will call you paranoid. Family will say you're lost. Society will label you a troublemaker. And the isolation begins. You lose the comfort of ignorance. You lose the ability to blend in. You lose the luxury of not knowing. But here's the secret. The price is worth paying. Because every cage you leave behind is a step toward freedom. Every uncomfortable truth is a brick removed from your prison. And every lonely moment is proof. You've chosen the path less traveled. You become a threat, not because you want to be, but because you carry a dangerous awareness, and the system knows it. That's why so many who awaken are pushed aside, silenced, or forgotten. Because truth is a contagion. Once it spreads, control cracks, power trembles, and history can finally be rewritten by those brave enough to bear the cost. So I ask you now, are you willing to pay the price, to stand alone, if you must, to carry the burden of seeing what others refuse? Because that is the moment you become free. And nothing, no lie, no chain, no threat, can take that away. You've learned the lies, the cages, the scripts. But knowledge alone is not power. Power comes from one thing. Action, not noisy action, not flashy rebellion, but the quiet, relentless discipline to reclaim your life, to master your mind, to rewrite your own story. This is the path few dare to walk, because it demands sacrifice, focus, and a refusal to return to sleep. True power is not about overthrowing others, it's about overthrowing yourself, your fears, your doubts, your programming. It's about becoming the master of your inner kingdom, the only place no one else can truly control. This is the awakening beyond awakening, the place where freedom is no longer a concept, it's a lived reality, and it starts now. With your next thought, your next choice, your next refusal to accept the dull history they fed you, because the real history, the forbidden history, is the one you write from this moment forward. You've walked the shadows of history. You've seen the hidden patterns, felt the weight of silence, tasted the bitter truth behind every lie. Now, it's time to lock it in, to seal this transformation. So I want you to do something right now, in the comments below. Write this phrase twice. I am awake. I choose truth. Say it, type it, let it echo through your mind. Because this is not just words. It's a contract between you and the unseen forces that tried to keep you blind. It's a declaration that you will no longer be a passive actor in their play, that you accept the burden of awareness, that you choose to walk the path alone, if necessary, because from this moment on, you are different. The dull history no longer controls you. You are the author now, the keeper of forbidden truths, and with that power comes responsibility. To seek, to question, to resist, because the darkest history is not just something to fear. It's a call to awaken, a call to rise, and a call to become more than they ever expected. You've heard the secrets no one was meant to know. Now live by them, and never forget, the most dangerous thing is a man who remembers. Thank you for walking this path. Stay vigilant, stay free.